Hi everyone, welcome back to Extra Credit, and today is our 9th episode on the history of Rome. So last time we left off with Julius Caesar making his first fateful steps across the Rubicon River in northern Italy, getting ready to launch an all-out civil war for supreme power with his one-time best friend and now arch-enemy Pompey. We also saw how the Roman Senate had turned to Pompey and asked him to be their savior and to defend Rome against Caesar if he should come knocking. Pompey, of course, had said to the Senate that he would absolutely do this, and so as Caesar's army approached Rome, Pompey got ready to do exactly what he had promised to do. He bravely stood his ground and got ready to fight to the death against his old... Wait, what? Okay, so I've just been informed that apparently when Caesar approached Rome, Pompey instantly took his entire army and fled to Greece. So more like a brave Sir Robin kind of move.
He was not at all afraid to be killed in nasty ways. Brave, 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 brave Sir Robin.
Oh well, Pompey, at least you know for sure there's a spot for you in the next Monty Python film. Okay, so for Pompey to run away to Greece actually wasn't quite as cowardly as it may seem, although it did seem pretty cowardly and didn't exactly inspire a whole lot of confidence from the senators who had put their trust in him. But remember, we had said that Pompey had made his entire career out east conquering land and making allies. And so for Pompey to go to Greece to try to fight Caesar there instead of Italy was kind of like Pompey's equivalent of taking home field advantage. It just made more sense for him because he would have more natural allies in the area and he would know the terrain better as well. However, kind of like Captain Barbossa with Jack Sparrow, Pompey seems to have forgotten one very important thing, mate, and that's that this is Julius Caesar he's dealing with. And so when the two forces meet at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC, Pompey feels pretty confident about his chances. In fact, what he does is he lays out his entire victory banquet before the battle has even happened. I mean, really, Pompey, you just don't do that. You're just asking for it. And that's exactly what Pompey got, because when the two sides joined battle at Pharsalus on August 9th in 48 BC, when the dust had finally settled, Caesar claims to have killed or injured or captured upwards of 10,000 of Pompey's soldiers and claims to only have lost a couple hundred himself. But seeing as those numbers come from Caesar himself, they're kind of sus. However, Caesar did win a commanding victory, made all the sweeter by the fact that he got to waltz into Pompey's tent and eat the victory feast himself. In other news, Pompey spent the night in the forest, dining on, what was it again? Oh yeah, humble pie with a side of bitter, bitter irony. However, Pompey himself wasn't done yet. He fled to Egypt this time, and he tried to raise a brand new army to continue taking the fight to Caesar. However, the Egyptians by this point could see the way the wind was blowing, and they wanted to throw in their lot with Caesar. And so as soon as Pompey lands in Egypt, the Egyptians meet him and then behead him. When Caesar follows, because he's pursuing Pompey, of course, he is met by the Egyptian ambassadors who are carrying Pompey's head as a trophy to show off to Caesar. This, as you can see from this lovely painting, causes Caesar to recoil in disgust. Now, why is Caesar so upset by the sight of Pompey's head? I mean, it's not like he hadn't seen thousands of dismembered corpses before. No, rather, what Caesar had intended to do was to show Pompey clementia, which is a Latin word that means something like mercy. In other words, Caesar wanted to show the Romans how merciful he was by sparing Pompey's life. Remember, Pompey had been so popular with the Romans himself that it was in Caesar's best interests to show him mercy, and the fact that he was denied this chance made him really mad. It was also really upsetting for Caesar to see his old friend butchered in this really callous, terrible way, and the fact that Pompey had been such a great man in his own time made the whole scene even more tragic. However, he was soon comforted by the fact that he got to know the Egyptian pharaoh Cleopatra really, really well, and spoiler alert, she's actually going to be the last Egyptian pharaoh of all time because of her choice to get involved in the ins and outs of Roman politics. Caesar and Cleopatra spent some lovely time together cruising up and down the Nile River, and then Caesar had to buzz off and go mop up some of his enemies who were still causing trouble, put down a few rebellions here and there, and finally he wound up back in Rome. The year was 45 BC, and Caesar had now accomplished his number one goal in life, which was to become the number one man in Rome. He was now king in all but name, because remember, the Romans hated kings, so it wasn't really an option for Caesar to call himself that. What he did with his power was actually to try to make life somewhat better for the common people of Rome. For example, he tried to pass laws to make traffic flow more smoothly in Rome during the daytime, because the whole city was basically a crowded, noisy, smelly mess. He also gave us this lovely thing called the Julian calendar, which we still use to this day. And your summertime is brought to you by Julius Caesar and his great-nephew, who's going to become extremely important in about one more episode. But it was in February of 44 BC that Caesar took the fateful step of giving himself a new title. Now remember, the Romans hated kings and were terrified of someone becoming a king and taking that much power, so to make sure nobody got too concerned, Caesar called himself not king, but dictator for life. Caesar, you just earned yourself a slow clap, man. It should also be said that even though he was dictator for life, the rest of his life is not actually going to be that long. You see, lots of the senators were still really upset with him and were angry, and even though they couldn't oppose him publicly anymore because he was so popular, they could still plot behind the scenes, which is exactly what they started to do. They launched history's most famous assassination plot. And the date they chose to put this plot into action has become one of the most famous dates in all of human history, March 15th, 44 BC, a date that the Romans called the Ides of March. On this date, Caesar woke up in bed next to his wife, and she immediately turned to him, apparently, and said, "Sweetie, I've got a really bad feeling. Don't go to work today. Something terrible is going to happen." And Caesar turns to her and says, "Honey, I'm Julius Caesar. I'm going to be fine." Which just goes to show, guys, listen to your wife. She's probably a lot smarter than you. Caesar gets up out of bed, he goes and walks through the streets, he's surrounded by the usual throngs of adoring admirers, and when he gets into the Senate house, he approaches the great big fancy chair that's been set up for him there, which is totally not a throne though, right? Because he's not a king, he's just a dictator for life. So he sits down in his big fancy chair, which is totally not a throne, and a bunch of senators come up to him holding out a petition for him to look at. Caesar rises, extends his hand to take the petition, and that is the signal. Immediately, the conspirators whip out their daggers and begin to plunge them into Caesar's flesh over and over again. In their frenzy, they actually stab themselves and their friends a whole bunch of times too. Now, Caesar puts up a pretty good fight until, according to legend, he saw the face of his friend Brutus among the assassins. This caused Caesar to cry out the words, "Et tu, Brute?" which roughly translated means something like, "Really, Brutus? Seriously, man? You're a part of this whole thing too? Are you kidding me? I thought we were pals, man. I thought we were pals. I'm totally unfriending." Roughly. But after seeing Brutus's face, Caesar lost the will to resist, fell to the floor, drew his toga across his eyes, and breathed his last. The ecstatic senators then ran into the Roman streets, shouting that freedom had been restored and the Republic was alive and well again. The tyrant was dead. And they were right about, one of those things at least. Julius Caesar was dead, but the Republic, far from being restored, was now completely dead too. You see, what Caesar's life and career had shown was that the common people of Rome were more than ready to accept one man being their sole boss, and all power going into the hands of that one person, which was, of course, the very idea that the Republic had been created to destroy. And so now, even though the dictator himself was dead, stabbed 23 times in defense of liberty, liberty itself, at least in the form of the Republic, would never be restored to Rome. So what are we to make of the legacy of Julius Caesar? Well, personally, I can't exactly say that I have a ton of admiration for somebody who launched a whole series of wars that led to hundreds of thousands of deaths simply to further his own political goals and ambitions. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that Caesar is one of the, quote, great figures of human history for the way that his life teaches us about both the desire for power and the dangers of power as well. But whether love him or loathe him, whatever you think about Caesar, what's undeniable is that Rome now is going to cease being a power-sharing republic and now is transformed into a one-man show called the Empire, ruled by one individual, the Emperor. And it's the history of Rome as an empire now that we're going to start looking at in our very next episode. So if you want to find out where the story goes from here, we'll see you next time. Hey everyone, thanks again for watching. It's been a lot of fun making this Rome series so far, and hard to believe that we are now almost halfway through it. Your challenge for this week is to go find a good historical source that tells you more about the Ides of March, and find out a couple other interesting details of what happened on that fateful day. That's all for now. As always, keep fit and have fun, and we'll see you later.